Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tulika Conversations, where we speak to authors about their works brought out by Tulika Books. Today, we are pleased to have with us Sasanka Perera and Renny Thomas. Sasanka is the chairman of the Colombo Institute for Human Sciences, and Renny teaches at IISER-Bhopal. They are the editors of our forthcoming volume titled Decolonial Keywords, South Asian Thoughts and Attitudes. The volume is a collection of 30 essays, uh, where each essay focuses on a keyword, and the essays have been further thematically arranged. So, to start off, Sasanka and Renny, I would like you to tell us, is there any particular reason for the book to be in this format? How did you guys put this book together?
Let me just rattle off and then Renny can continue. See, in this format, because we consider that people don't have time to read, including scholars nowadays. So, and also this is an initial effort. So, an initial effort and taking time kind of thing into consideration, we assume that people should look at these words as precisely as possible because this is something that has not been done before. And then if there's adequate interest among scholars or other people, then that is when you can go further. That is when you can develop this into something much more broader. And also we wanted this to be kind of encyclopedic. That is that you have a whole lot of things in a small space, like in a single book. So that was the basic logic. Renee, you want to
Yeah,
add to this?
yes, as Sasanka just mentioned, our idea was to really think about concepts and ideas through keywords. But it's not that we don't really have, volumes on keywords. In India, like we do have like a couple of very interesting volumes, like we refer to volumes such as Craig Jeffrey's volume on keywords, and it's called Keywords for Modern India. And later, Rukmini Bayan Nair and Peter Ronald D'Souza's volume, Keywords for India, Lexicon. It's interesting because both these volumes are about India, but we wanted to do something else, right? Because keywords basically for South Asia. So we have concepts and ideas coming from diverse South Asian languages. So the idea was to then look at the language, different languages, and ideas and concepts from these different languages, how they actually inform our theorizing of the social, political, economic, historical. Sasank would have more to add on to that.
No, I'm fine for the moment.
As the title suggests, the book is focused on the theme of decolonization or decoloniality. How does the book attempt to define this term, uh, particularly in the context when the term has sort of gained prominence in current popular and political discourse, almost in a very nativistic or indigeneity in those contexts of indigeneity and nativism. So, how does the book address this aspect?
Uh, See, now we are very mindful of this concern, and this is something that you see both in India and in Sri Lanka for sure, but also in other parts of South Asia.
Yeah.
But this is not the way in which we have thought of decolonization, right? It's not this very limited rhetorical, puritanical kind of approach. See, the point is this. It is not that we have a this diabolical concern with things that come from the West, whatever it is, clothing or ideas, right? But people often don't ask the question when concepts and philosophical positions and theories and so on and so forth that they get generated in very specific historical and temporal contexts. Now, without asking the question whether those temporalities and so on and so forth can be replicated in other places, can that those bodies of knowledge be used to read our kinds of situations as effectively? Of course, in other words, we are concerned about the claims of universality of knowledge, whether it's theory or philosophy or whatever, right? So, given that, we also have to ask this question before colonialism and the knowledge systems that colonialism and post-colonial politics and so on and so forth brought to our part of the world, did we not think? Did we not have analytical categories in our languages and so on? So now the point is not to be nativistic, but to see whether these kinds of concepts and categories and even processes of thinking, I mean, we use the word attitude in our book too, whether these kinds of things can read situations in a way that might actually be beneficial to social sciences and humanities beyond the region too. I'll just take one example from my own language. I speak Sinhala at home. And people may have heard of a few years ago, like what is happening in Nepal right now. We also had an uprising led by youth. And the one word that was used for that was aragale, which everybody got to know about this across the world. Now, I have written an essay to this volume on that single word, and I'm asking the questions now. Does this refer to a particular kind of struggle that is different from other kinds of struggles? Right? What were the expectations of that particular struggle? Now, the question that we want to ask then is whether that kind of category, that kind of word, can be used to, let's say, now analyze what is going on in Nepal, right? Whether it can be used to analyze to some extent what might happen in, let's say, Trumpian United States, right? So, in other words, it'll be very nice that that the process of colonialized kind of knowledge can be somehow reversed, and also you come up with certain kinds of things that are coming from your own histories, right? So, this is one of the premises upon which this book has been thought of. And it is also in this kind of context that the word decolonization have been conceived for this collection, right? And you know that this is not the only way in which it can be defined. Renny, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, absolutely. But it is also to think about, rather rethink the idea of West itself. I mean, so in the introduction, we talk about the significance of thinking actually about the West through figures that we don't really discuss, such as, for example, in sociology, W.B. Du Bois, right? So when we think of even Western social theory, we don't discuss scholars like W.B. Du Bois. So what about thinking about decolonization in that sense as well? That we are not just talking about elsewhere, as the way as they put it, but also thinking about the West itself. There is a different way of looking at the West if you are thinking about people like W.B. Du Bois and Ambedkar for that matter. In the introduction, we discussed that in great detail. So the idea is to really then go beyond nativism, academically engage. And obviously, this notion of decolonizing is very much present in various disciplines, including ours, such as sociology and anthropology. I mean, very important work has been done. Like Ali McGee has a very fascinating book called Decolonizing Sociology, and Michael Burwai and various people are doing it in that part of the world. So we thought, like, this is important also to have it in our own context, thinking through our own languages.
I mean, I won't take any names, but there have been works by popular scholars who very much follow the nativistic they adhere to that line of thought. And in their works, they have referred to academics who perhaps do not ascribe to and have actually disavowed any sort of inclination to a more nativistic understanding of decolonization. So, is there any way for academics to sort of ensure that or to prevent their works from being appropriated in that way, or is it just like you just keep it open to interpretation of the public?
Well, see, this is where this this postmodern idea of the death of the author comes into play, right? I mean, see, beyond the point, I don't think we have that much control over what we write. But one thing we should do as writers and as editors in this case is to also explain our politics, right? So this is what in the introduction we have done, and that is to say what we are not going to do with this, what we are not expecting, and what we are expecting, right? So now, once you say this, there's nothing much if people can take this whole thing out of context. I mean, this has happened to be more than once, not in this particular thing, but for example, some time ago, I wrote about religion in the sense these evangelical Christian forms of religion in Sri Lanka and Nepal. Now, my idea was to understand how these religious formations were active in these two places and what kind of things, what kind of conflict kind of thing that they were bringing about because of the way in which they understood culture, right? Of course, that was my point. So to me, I was being a very dry, cut and dry kind of sociologist. But then it was used by people that I had no control over to say, oh my God, see what is happening to Buddhism and Hinduism and this and that. See, but then at some point, I actually had to come into the same forums where these guys were talking about and said, this is not what I was talking about. So I won't be surprised if our book, this present book, might be used out of context by other people whose political orientations are different. And I don't think that can be controlled because, I mean, it cannot be controlled beyond a point. This is a free world in that sense, when it comes to thinking. But one thing we should do is to also, if it happens, and it will, I think we have to try to take control to the extent possible. We have to engage with these folks and say, you know, to make the argument, this was not the intention, right? Renny?
Yeah, also, I mean, yes, exactly. I mean, one of the things that we were very careful is to also, trying to think, I don't know how successful we were, is that to think about the idea of decolonizing decoloniality itself, right? So we have made clear attempt in that regard, like, for example, the kind of authors that we have. I mean, even if you think about the idea of nativism, many of these authors and the ideas are not necessarily part of the mainstream nativism, right? So in a way, ours is really a response to that kind of argument as well.
There is also a critique of the application of Western theoretical models in non-Western, particularly South Asian settings in the book. I wanted to know what are the problems of such applications in what ways do they impede our understanding of certain issues, or if you can think of certain issues or any issue at present which has been affected by such I don't want to say non-critical applications, but such applications of Western theories without any critical evaluation.
See, as I was trying to say at the very beginning, it's not that we are, distancing ourselves from ideas. Both Renny and I have been trained in that tradition in sociology. And in my case, I was educated in the West too, right? So it is not a hostility in that crude sense, right? But at the same time, for quite a bit of time, at least in my case, I've been thinking now whether what I referred to earlier, this whole business of universality of knowledge and particularly of philosophy and theory has always discomforted me, right? It is, let's put it this way. If you are looking at something like, basic Marxist thinking of class formation and these kinds of things. Now, is it that simple to use the Marxian logic of class formation and labor relations and so on and so forth that was in his original writing in the same way in our part of the world without fine-tuning, right? Because right now, if you look at a place like Sri Lanka or India, when you say middle class, it has such massive connotations. It is not a simple place. It is not a simple thing. It has so many divisions, subdivisions that Marx wouldn't have thought about, right? I mean, I'm giving a very crude, simple example. So the idea then is not really to dismantle or throw away the idea of class. I think it is extremely important, but also to fine tune it. in a way that we can make more sense out of it. And also things like religion. And now, of course, it is a Western idea that, I mean, particularly an American, North American, Western European idea that religion has to be separated from politics and so on and so forth. Now, ideally, I would fully agree with that. But at the same time, you have to ask the question whether just because ideas of faith are somehow entangled with politics, whether that itself becomes a problem, or is it the way in which that entanglement happened that is a problem, right? So I think these are the things that we should be asking. It's for the simple reason it is not very intelligent to take a model that is developed in a particular place at a particular time and just impose it on ourselves without reflection. So all we are suggesting is for that reflection to be dominant, right? I think scholars have written about it fairly well, particularly from India, and and we have referred to these works in our introduction because what we are trying to do is also, I mean, this is not something new. This is also the whole process that we are trying to take forward had already begun in certain ways. Thinking reflectively and critically of decolonizing social sciences. Prathama Banerjee's work, Aditya Nigam's, and these kinds of people have talked about this much before us. But what we are trying to do is to bring those ideas into something much more pedagogically sound in the sense that we are saying, okay, this is what these folks have talked about. Now, this is something very concrete from the ground, from South Asia, from Nepal, from different parts of India, from Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. Now, can we bring this conversation far more rigorously into the classroom in a way that students might understand? That is the kind of thing I think we are looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really not about not teaching these, Western theories, which all of us do actually, but it is to also have a conversation with the other forms of theories that comes from our part of the world. So what are the possibilities of these conversations? So if you look at our volume and the authors, they come from very diverse disciplines like Sasanka just mentioned Pradhama's name, and we have people who do disciplines such as feminist science studies, history, anthropology, all kinds of disciplines, right? So they're asking very pertinent questions about what happens in the field. And that's where I think the classroom is very important because many of our questions are also a result of the kind of questions that we get in the classrooms. The case of class that Sasaya has mentioned, like I think it is also about the democratization of classrooms in our times and how there comes different questions which was not heard before. For example, the question of caste, right? So I think it is also, we are trying to also address some of those questions, so what kind of conversation can we have?
Sasanka, as you mentioned, something like class and labor, it reminded me of Ambedkar, where he's bringing these issues together, but he's also sort of grounding it in the context of India with caste, and that understanding of caste can only happen in a Indian setting because it's something which is very interior to the South Asian context. But at the same time, there's also a very heavy influence of John Dewey's ideas on Ambedkar and something like equality, fraternity, and liberty. These are all then, to say, Western theoretical imports in a sense, where he gets terms or sort of which equips him to not only address these problems but also sort of provide a solution for them, which sort of unfolds into the Constitution of India. So, but at the same time, he's also a decolonial thinker of that sort, as the book rightfully mentions him. So I want you to talk a bit more about that in this particular
See, I think that is a classic example of somebody who has engaged with both ideas from that he has learned from the West with experiences in India, right? This is precisely the kind of thing I think we should be doing. Rather than now, Ambedkar didn't impose these things without reflection, right? So before I left India, one of my the last couple of classes that I taught, I can't remember now with the PhD classes. We did use PhD theory classes out of all things. We were using the ideas of Phule and the ideas of Ambedkar and Periyar. You know, these kinds of people. Now, these are not the kind of people who's who will be taught in a theory class in this part of the world or any part of the world, right? Because we thought that these people, when it comes to things like liberty, about and things like freedom and so on and so forth, that they had actually dealt with quite well in terms of, like in the case of Ambedkar, as you were saying, bringing some of these ideas that he had borrowed to deal with in the local context. And I find this addressing of things far more important when we are looking at the region more broadly. See, just because Phule was talking about his experiences in the Indian context and particularly in Maharashtra and also in the case of Periyar in Tamil Nadu, it doesn't mean that those ideas and those experiences are not proximate to people like me and my history in places like Sri Lanka, right? I would say that those ideas are probably far more proximate than some of the, let's say, Foucault or somebody else, right? But that also doesn't mean that we should be discarding Foucault, and he's one of my favorite writers, right? But I'm very skeptical about, in a wholesale bringing Foucault into our context without allowing his ideas to percolate into our thinking and also deal with it. And I think, in a way, given the limitations of his time and the context of his time, that is the sort of thing that Ambedkar also tried to do. And I think these are the things that we really don't take into account, no? Because as I was saying, now, why should we not teach in theory classes these kinds of people? Why should we not look at people like Faiz Ahmad Faiz in his poetry? Bring that into a discourse on theory, rather than this very clinical importation of ideas that you pick from a supermarket, theory supermarket from London or Paris or something, and bring it to our classes. This is also the criticism that Banerjee and others have brought in there, this article from some years ago, right? So we are simply inviting people to be reflective, particularly the younger folks who the kinds of people that used to come to my classes, who continue to come to Renne's classes, right?
Yeah,
Renny,
I
you want to
teach
add
a
anything?
theory course this semester actually. So I may also because it's a semester course, no, don't have enough time. So they have to read Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. I mean, there is no doubt about it. But then, of course, I also give them other ideas. What kind of other readings can they engage with? But there is no way that they can escape from these writings, right? Because you have to read. So therefore, it's not that one shouldn't read these classics. But we can ask certain questions such as what makes certain text classics, just to invite students to think these questions in a bit more critical manner. That's the aim of this volume as well, because if you look at the languages that we covered, right, we have like, of course, from concepts and ideas from Urdu, languages sometimes we don't even consider as part of South Asia, imagination of South Asia, such as, Hebrew, Malayalam, Tamil, Arabic, so they are doing something actually, right? So, therefore, we basically wanted readers to think about these concepts through these languages and also the forms, because we have just mentioned actually in the beginning that it's a keyword. But I guess these are very detailed essays, like 4,000 to 5,000 words. This is something that makes our volume very different from other existing keywords volume, because most of the volumes are like very short in nature, like the entries are very short, sometimes 2 paragraphs and 3 paragraphs. But then ours is like 4,000 to 5,000 words, and the authors had a year to write this essay. So that there is a difference there as well.
Because of the uh, unique, format of the book, were there any challenges when you were putting together this volume? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, main challenge was to capture the completeness of South Asia in terms of what is put into this. I mean, we always say South Asia very flippantly, you know. And in any case, it is a very in many ways a problematic term, because there are regions in South Asia that should have been included in it that are not, and the other way around. But our problem was, you see, many of these essays in this, even though it's called South Asia, comes from India, but it does not come from North India. And which is generally the case quite often. It comes from all over India. So that's why Renny was saying this, who has heard of Hebrew Malayalam or Tamil Arabic? So Urdu or Punjabi or Hindi, but right? So we have those too. But but we couldn't get much from Afghanistan, for example. It's not that there are no categories that are typical of the languages spoken in that country, or for that matter from Maldives or Bhutan. It's also the nature of our own context, and therefore our own limitations, and also of the limitations in the nature of knowledge production in these places, right? Um, and we did try, but then I think sometimes this happens. Very often this happens. So I would say if there was a major challenge, that was to capture cartographically the kind of the completeness of this current idea of South Asia in terms of what is actually written. But it doesn't mean that there is no plurality. That is what I want to establish. There is massive plurality in this. This is when, if you look at the essays that have come from India alone, it gives the kind of complexity of India that is nowadays in contemporary politics people don't seem to take into account at all, right? India is not a simple place. It is an amalgamation of, I would say, different countries in many ways, at least different cultural formations, and that comes out very clearly. So I would say that is probably the strength of the book. That capturing of that linguistic and also the complexity in terms of ideas, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, of course, this is a major challenge, but I think what we were blessed was actually the authors, because it was essentially a collective work. I mean, they were all excited, the scholars that we have contacted. So you could see that the scholars, the authors who actually come from diverse backgrounds, different places, not just people who are from metropolitan universities and locations, but we have people from all parts of India for that matter. So that was a rewarding experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And see, any editor would know, and I've been doing this for some time, and Renny too, editing a book is a nightmare, right? Now, editing 30 essays is I would say a nightmare plus plus plus. But
Yeah.
this was actually a surprisingly pleasant and efficient experience. The authors plus the publisher itself. But what I'm trying to say is that I think everybody got excited about the idea. And
Yeah.
therefore, I think we really didn't have to remind people too often about deadlines and so on. And right now, up to today, all the deadlines have been met without any problems. I mean, this is actually quite shocking. So I think this is a good example of a whole group of people, and many of them I don't personally know. I mean, Renny knows some of them, I know some of them, and all of them we know through their work. If there is a common denominator, I would say that everybody was excited and ignited by this idea. And if we were looking at keywords in the sense that Renny was referring to earlier, these very small, short things, I think it may not have taken off in the same sense. But this is short, encyclopedic, but also somewhat substantial. Now, where it goes from here, whether other people want to take it further or not, is entirely up to the future, right?
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this conversation. This brings me to the end of the interview, and we're all looking forward to the book. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Take care.
Thanks for having us.